Good morning, boys and girls. Today we are reading from A Child's History of the World. And since you had a couple chapters this week, I thought that I would read some to you. So mom or dad or grandma or whoever wouldn't have to read so much. So this chapter is called Blood and Thunder. So let me begin. I once had a big Newfoundland dog, and he was one of the best friends a boy ever had, and I don't know who it was that named him. He was named before I got him, but whoever it was must either have been ignorant of history or a bad chooser of names, because they named him Nero. And even a dog would have hated such a name, had he known whose name it was. Every good story usually has villains, bad guys, to make it interesting. Well, the story of Rome has plenty of villains, but one of the worst was Nero. He was a Roman emperor who lived not long after Jesus, and he is considered one of the cruelest and wickedest rulers that ever lived. He killed his mom, he killed his wife, he killed his teacher, who was named Seneca. Seneca was a good teacher. We think that he ordered both the Apostle Peter and Paul to their deaths, for they were executed during the time of Nero's reign. He seemed to take great pleasure in making other people suffer. He loved to see men torn to pieces by wild beasts. It amused him greatly. Let me show you a picture of this is the book I have of different gladiators, lion kept. And look at the stands of the Colosseum. They are full to capacity, watching these bloodbaths happen in front of their eyes. If a man was a Christian, that gave Nero an excuse to torture him horribly. Nero had some of the Christians, they were wrapped, like they would pour tar on them, and then they would put them in his garden, and when he went out at night, they would light them on fire so they could be torches, and as they died, they would provide light for Nero. He was just horrible. It is even said that Nero set Rome on fire just for the fun of seeing the city burn, and then he sat in a tower, and while he watched the blaze spreading, he played an instrument, and the saying is Nero fiddled while Rome burned. We're talking bad guy, bad guy. The fire burned day and night for a whole week and destroyed more than half the city, and then Nero laid the blame on the Christians. He said, I didn't do that. It was those Christians did that. Now, have you ever blamed someone else for something you did? I've done that, especially when I was young. And anyway, I blamed a lot on my brother. Sorry, Troy. Some think Nero really was crazy, and we hope that he was, for it was hard to think of a human being not crazy who was just so mean. Nero built himself an immense palace, and he laid it over extravagantly with gold and mother of pearl, and it was known as Nero's House of Gold. And at its front door, he put up this colossal statue of himself, of course, and it was 50 feet high. That's tall. Both the House of Gold and the statue were later destroyed, but the Colosseum, which was built a few years later, was named from this colossal statue of Nero that was once there. Nero was very conceited. He thought he could write poetry. He thought that he could sing beautifully, and he did very both badly. But no one was bold enough to make fun of him or to smile, because if they had, that person would have been put to death instantly. Even Rome, people who were not Christians feared and hated Nero. The military, his own army, rebelled against him, and before they had a chance to do anything, Nero heard what they were planning, and in order to save himself the disgrace of being put to death by his own army, he decided he would end his own life. But he was such a coward that he couldn't quite bring himself to, plunge his sword into himself. So he had to ask his slave to do that, which I believe his slave was just happy to do. So finally, Rome was rid of Nero, the worst of its rulers. So the next part of our Blood and Thunder story is about the Jews in Jerusalem. Now, they did not want Rome ruling over them. They never had. Like the Christians, the Jews could not worship the emperor as a god because they worshiped the one true God, and they were afraid to do much about it. In the year 70 AD, so this is after Jesus has died, like he's been dead for 40 years or so. In the year of 70 AD, the Jews rebelled. They said they would no longer obey Rome or pay money to the government. And the emperor sent his son, who was named Titus, with an army to put an end to the rebellion, to punish them as if they were disobedient children. And I want to show you a picture. This is a picture or a model of ancient Rome. Can you see that? You see the wall. The wall's on the outside. All right. So that's ancient Rome. I want to show you the temple of that. Here's one picture of the temple. Sometimes we talk about these Bible stories and we don't give you any pictures to help you understand what it looked like. Whoop. This is the building of the second temple. And here's a picture. So the Jews crowded into their city of Jerusalem to make a last stand against the Romans. But Titus destroyed the city completely. And that actually fulfilled what the Bible had said would happen, that one stone would not be left on another. Like they melted the stones to get the gold out of them from between them, I guess. And it was completely destroyed. And the Jews in it, 1 million Jews died in AD 70. And then Titus robbed the temple of all its valuable ornaments and brought them back to Rome. The great temple was destroyed. To celebrate this victory over Jerusalem, there was an arch that was built in the Forum of Rome, and through the arch, Titus and his army marched in triumph. And on the arch was carved a procession showing Titus leaving the city of Jerusalem with the temple ornaments. Chief among these ornaments was a golden 7-branch candlestick he had taken from the temple. Now today we see many copies in brass of the famous 7-branch candlestick. It's called a menorah, which is the Hebrew word for candlestick. The city was rebuilt later, but most of the Jews who survived have ever since been living in other countries all over the world. And when people leave their homeland and spread out, it's called diaspora. And that's what happened to the Jews. And until the Holocaust, which I'm not going to tell you about today, when they started coming back to Jerusalem. I'll show you a menorah. Can you see that? That is the arch that Titus walked through with his army, and it's huge. I don't know if you can really see that from there. This is a menorah, a 7-branched candlestick that is. It's very important to the Jewish faith. Okay, so we talked about Nero, bad guy, and in AD 70, the Temple of Jerusalem and the people being destroyed. And the third part of this chapter is the thunder. And I think you've talked a little bit about Mount Vesuvius You remember the volcano came from the name Vulcan, the blacksmith god, and people imagine that his forge in the heart of the volcano made the smoke and flames and ashes. And from time to time, the volcano Vesuvius thunders and quakes and spouts forth fire and throws up stone and gas and boils over with red hot rock called lava. It is the hot inside of the earth exploding. Yet people build houses and towns nearby and live even on the sides of the volcano. Every once in a while, their homes are destroyed when the volcano quakes and pours forth its fire. Yet the same people go right back and they build again in the same place. There was a time, at the time of Titus, and the little town of Pompeii near the base of Vesuvius, and wealthy Romans used to go there to spend their summers. And then one day in 79 AD, this is 9 years later after Jerusalem has been destroyed, just after Titus had become emperor, Vesuvius began to spout forth fire. The people living in Pompeii rushed for their lives, but they didn't have time to get away. They were smothered with the gases from the volcano before they had time to move, and falling down dead were buried deep in a boiling rain of fire and ashes, just where they happened to be when the eruption, as it is called, took place. Now the people in their houses lay buried beneath the ashes for 2,000 years. Like, people just forgot it, and they build on top of it. In the course of time, everyone had forgotten there ever was such a place. People came back as they had before and built houses over the spot where the city was. And then one day a man was digging a well and where Pompeii had once stood, and he dug up a man's hand, not a real hand, the hand of a statue. And he told others, and they set to work, and they dug and dug to see what else they could find until the whole town was dug out. And now you can go to Pompeii and see it very much like it was in 79 AD before it was destroyed. There are houses of the Romans who went there to spend their vacations, their shops and temples and palaces and public baths and the theater and the marketplace or the forum. The streets were paved with blocks of lava, once melted stone. They still show ruts where the worn into them by the wheels of the chariots that the Romans used to drive. The stepping stones were placed at some crossings in case of heavy rains, where the streets were full of water. One could cross on them from curb to curb. These stepping stones are still there. The floors of the houses were made of bits of colored stone to form pictures. These are called mosaics, and we've studied that a little bit. They're still there, and in the vestibule of one house there is in the floor a mosaic picture of a dog. And under it are the Latin words cave canem, which means look out for the dog. The bones of the people who were caught and buried alive in the ashes were also found. There were also found bronze ornaments worn by the women, vases that decorated the home, pots and pans and dishes and lamps which they used to light the houses. Beds and chairs were found just as they'd been buried. Still more remarkable, cakes were found on the table, a loaf of bread half eaten, meat ready to be cooked, a kettle on the fire with the ashes still underneath it, beans and peas, and one egg unbroken. Probably the oldest egg in the world. So I want to show you some pictures of Pompeii. This is Pompeii today. You can see Mount Vesuvius in the distance. And you can see the old ruins. See if I can find you another picture. So here's one of the victims that they uncovered. This is another picture. And that's a family. And they were just covered in ash. Someone praying. There's a street. And we can learn a lot about Rome from studying Pompeii. All right, so that is all we're going to read today. That was a really long lesson. I don't know why they put all those things into one chapter, but I hope you've enjoyed and learned a lot. See you next time.